Chapter 1. The human mind isn't a separate entity from the body. French philosopher René Descartes proposed that the human mind was independent of the body and that it operated without any physical influence. This theory was carried on without any question as the Cartesian dualism, terming the mind immaterial and the body material. The body isn't whole without the mind, and neither is the mind without the body. Research done by Antonio Damasio has also shown quite the opposite, that the mind is actually influenced greatly by the body, in fact. When humans experience great trauma to their frontal lobes, there is increased change in the person's outward behavior. Trauma to the frontal lobe of the brain has been discovered to be the cause of a number of behavioral oddities. If they were once cool, calm, and collected, there's a switch to the extremes. The condition is known as the Gage syndrome, named after the famous railroad foreman Phineas Gage, who survived a grueling accident where an iron rod shot through his left eye and out the back of his skull, damaging much of his frontal lobe in the process. The brain, the case for the mind, must not be allowed any exposure to damage or the mind and body will suffer. Before the accident, Phineas Gage was quite sociable, composed, and witty. Although he didn't lose his motor functions, he became a totally new man, being prone to mood swings and fits of anger, which made it difficult to keep a job, taking him from a life of wealth to one of abject poverty at the age of 25. The self is a repeatedly reconstructed biological state. Antonio Damasio. Chapter 2. The brain contains a system of networks that aid its overall activities. Much of what we know about the brain is made possible thanks to neuroanatomy, the study of the structure and organization of the nervous system. We learn that the brain has independent, segregated, and defined nervous systems. This means that we can understand the way a person behaves by studying their brain's activity. We know very little of the brain's workings, but the little we do know can be a guide to understanding the body. With Gage syndrome, though, there is no real way to immediately isolate a behavior and attribute it to notable brain activity. Since there's no real change in the sufferer's behavior, you would need to see them exhibit these new characteristics to be certain a change had occurred. Physiological changes arising from damage to the frontal lobe are often dismissed, not readily noticeable. The brain is essentially a system of subsystems. Each system can be isolated and used as a way to pinpoint neurological changes in an individual. Phineas Gage's incident happened at a time when it was quite difficult to do any real in-depth neurological analysis, so it was brushed off. Modern-day knowledge on neurology and neuroanatomy has helped to truly identify and treat brain conditions. His case became the benchmark for studies up to today, and has always been an inspiration to the work of Damasio when he attempted to debunk Descartes' theory. He was angled to trace a physical change due to, say, an accident, trauma to the frontal lobe, and neurological glitches in moods and behaviors. Chapter 3. Emotions aren't the enemy of reason and can shape the decisions we make. Another insight provided by neuroanatomy is the knowledge provided on emotions and reason, two conflicting themes of human existence that ultimately govern our decision-making. We believe emotions cloud judgment, but in fact, they help make better decisions. How we act is influenced by how we think. This is, of course, a running theme in both philosophy and science. Descartes is credited for his famous saying, "I think, therefore I am," which is also in agreement that much of who and how we are is subject to the mind. It is amusing to think that Descartes, too, believed the mind was a concept detached from the body. Most of our actions, involuntary or otherwise, are influenced by our emotions. That being said, we must acknowledge that much of the actions we take are either as a result of emotions or reason. But are they themselves independent? Actually, that's not true. As it turns out, the cluster of systems dedicated to clear-minded reasoning is the same cluster that is responsible for feelings and emotions. The brain doesn't have different parts responsible for emotions and reason. Both stem from the same part. Interestingly enough, emotion can impede reason and cloud your judgment. That's when it's in excess, or at least that's what we thought. It turns out not enough emotion can also disrupt reason as well. In the case of injuries to the frontal lobe, the individual loses almost all their empathy, which of course leads to poor decisions. Chapter 4. Reason meets with emotions and feelings to bring us a better view of the world. Damasio had a theory that helped to explain the science of rationality. He says there are 4 factors to consider when we address the issue of rationality. Decisions in complex situations require reasoning strategies. Emotions are instrumental in biological regulation of the body. The brain processes and recreates multiple images. The brain's ability to remember these images is down to a large memory. These factors are what come together to influence the way we perceive the world around us aptly. And how we do this is dependent on the bridge between reason and decisions, emotions and feelings. It is the coming together of emotions and reasons that births sane, clear-headed decisions. These two are often confused as the same thing, but they actually aren't identical. Emotions are a complicated process, more intricate and harder to unravel alone. Emotions are the embodiment of a conscious process that represents a bodily reaction. Feelings, however, are the realization of the emotions themselves. Emotions are whole, complex entities, while feelings are the physiological manifestations. In other words, feelings give body to the emotions, and without feelings, we probably would not be able to understand emotions. Emotions are of two kinds, primary and secondary. Primary emotions are those primal instincts triggers, like fear and anxiety, stemming from the amygdala. Primary emotions are the base instincts we evolved to have as reactions to our daily experiences. Secondary emotions are those that stem from a more methodical thought process. Instead of a rushed approach, it arises from the subtle connection between keen observation and the initial primary emotion. Did you know? The human mind can experience two conflicting emotions at the same time and can feel multiple feelings, physical sensations also, all of which can be identified correctly by the brain. Chapter 5. We can map the emotional reactions we exhibit thanks to somatic markers. This secondary emotional process is very important when avoiding the obvious rash decisions that would arise otherwise. Secondary emotional pathways are such that emotion and reason play vital roles in the end result. If we rely on our primary emotions, we will make more terrible decisions most of the time. The role of emotions in decision-making is largely overlooked because most believe emotions make it difficult to arrive at a sane decision. But in truth, without emotions, there would be no reasoning in the decision. So then, the partnership must thrive if we are to establish clear-cut expressions of our feelings. The reason will be hollow if it isn't backed up by a clear expression of one's feelings. The key ingredient to this union is somatic markers. Somatic markers are feelings associated with emotions, directly often followed with physiological showings such as palpitations and sweating. Consider them as the symptoms to know when one is heavily overcome with a primary emotion or isn't. The physiological manifestations of emotions help shape either immediate or delayed decisions. These somatic markers are responsible for a lot more than decisions. They're also receptors of some sort for reward and pleasure. Patients with trauma to their frontal lobe or injury to their brains are less focused on rewards or satisfaction when carrying out a task. Individuals with considerable damage to their frontal lobe are noted to lack any activity in the reward center of the brain. They execute these tasks as part of their personal routine, with no enjoyment derived from it whatsoever. This behavior is also present in psychopaths as well, although theirs might be as a result of just much growth of the region during the fetal stage. This is further proof of the mind's influence on the body and vice versa. Chapter 6. Descartes' Error helped us understand the union between the mind and body. What really was Descartes' error, and how does Damasio seek to fix it or remedy it? Simply put, René Descartes was convinced that humans existed as a functional duality. He referred to it as a metaphysical duality. That is to say, the mind and body, emotion and reason, are together and yet separate entities. The duality of the human mind and body is one that both defines and unites them. We have learned that this is hardly true. Much of the body's actions, voluntary or involuntary, are orchestrated by emotions. Sociological changes in individuals can be accurately traced to a neurological change due to trauma, or any change, or lack thereof, in brain development during the fetal stage. The mind plays a vital role in the function of the body. Any flaw in it means a flaw in the body. Think of the mind as the software that runs on the hardware, the body. Without the body, the mind is but a disembodied entity, and without the mind, the body is a lifeless husk. The mind and body are truly a duality, but unlike Descartes' theory, both are intertwined and in constant submission to the other, none a master to the other. The mind is the driver and the body is the vehicle. Both need each other to properly function. Although in metaphysics, you can indeed separate the mind from the body in theory. This must have been what informed the theory of metaphysical duality purported by Descartes, since people used to believe that man existed as two distinct parts of the sum. Metaphysics doesn't fully grasp the concept of mind and body since it dismisses the interdependency. The error was considering the body and mind to be separate. Damasio moved to theorize that the mind was embodied, that is to say, it possessed a full form within and without the body. Although Damasio intended to correct the error, he ended up only linking the theory he sought to correct with his own. Conclusion. The place of neuroanatomy in today's society cannot be overemphasized, as it gives humans an insight into just how the brain works in relation to the way the body works. The prevalent idea is that the brain and mind worked separately from the body, but this is quite impossible. It would mean that the mind could simply up and leave, go on a walkabout, and come back when it pleases. This might be true if you consider metaphysics, but not really applicable in real life because this isn't proven scientifically, and because of the extensive research carried out by Damasio in the field of neuroanatomy and neurology. He argues that the mind and body worked in seamless unison and not independent of each other. The body acts and functions in direct dependence of the mind. The bioregulation of the body with homeostasis is heavily pinned on the workings of the mind's neural network. The mind itself is merely an intangible entity only brought to life thanks to the physical collection of nerves, muscles, and neurons of the brain. With that being said, neither can function without the other, and there's a direct connection with the behavior of either with the other. Descartes' error was to believe that either was an independent entity, and Damasio corrected it by saying they are instead interdependent. Try this. The mind and body are essentially one. It is thus important to take good care of both. You can take up meditation and physical exercise to help tune your mind and body.